And as frequently I'll do is spend the first half hour or so in the conceptual world, and we're going to talk about 4 words today. Text, which we've already done, so that'll be brief, and then I'll show you. Come on. Text and Hyper and Wiki and Tiddly. Shut up. Come on. Not surprisingly, and shouldn't be mysterious to you, when those words are put together as compound words, we get hypertext and tiddlywiki. So what I want to do is break apart those 4 words and talk about them conceptually. And I'm hoping that my strategy for the class is to have you do stuff. So you build it, you make it, and then take a step back and look at it more conceptually. Say, oh, that's what I did. That's what that's called. I could do it the other way around. I've done it both ways, and I think that this works because you build it, you make it, it works, maybe, or it doesn't work, and then you say, oh, that's what that is, and then that should make it, that should allow you to attach concepts to practice. But I start with the practice. The first part of each class, then we're beginning to, you'll see that we're filling in some of these concepts for the work that you've already done. So obviously we're going to look at hypertext and tiddlywiki. I broke my slide program. I don't know what happened to my colors, so they're all white. Oh well, but you can get it. So we did text. It was last Thursday, I think. We talked about, can't remember the words we used there. What were the words that we looked at? Text, interactivity, writing, and designing, because we did designing and writing interactive texts. So I'm not going just to refresh your idea, the notion of a text is you've been building texts. Every tiddlywiki is a text. It's bounded. It's all the stuff that's associated with that text is in there. It might have links to other texts pushing out. We haven't done much of that, but you've been building texts. And today we're going to, with the exercise that we'll work on as soon as I'm done here, we'll begin to see how that text is woven together. And you saw a little bit of that in the way that you built your About Me in tags, right? So you have all these tiddlers floating around there, and they're sort of woven together into this narrative. So you're beginning to see some of that. So Hyper, one of the readings I asked you to do for this week was out of this book. Yeah, I have it. Computer Lib and Dream Machines. So here's Computer Lib, and it, you'll see these pages are upside down. I'm going to pass it around just to, because I know you're not leaving with it. So here's where they meet. So these are Computer Lib and Dream Machines. So play with it. Make sure it ends up back here when I'm done. Just because, but what's interesting is to look at the way that this guy produced the book. He self-published it, and why did he do it that way? You know, it wasn't cheaper. It's because the traditional constraints of publication, no publisher is going to take that book from him at that time in 72. And so he wanted it to look the way he wanted it to look. It's a really bizarre size. The PDF of it is really hard to work with because the text is so tiny. If anybody ever visits my office, you'll see that there's a couple of pages that I put out on poster-sized paper that's taped to my wall, to my door. So you can sit there and read it if I'm not there. He invented the term, the author of that book invented the term hypertext in 1965. And so, you know, hyper in 65 had a slightly different meaning than it might today in our world. Hyper, and the way that he was talking about it, he was thinking about it in terms of hyperspace. And that's not a word that we typically understand today or use, but to him, hyperspace, at the time especially, meant, it comes out of science fiction actually, a space with more than 3 dimensions. So if you begin to think of the hypertexts that you're building as multi-dimensional texts, not just multi-sequential, but multi-dimensional, existing in several different dimensions simultaneously. You can't see multiple dimensions, right? I don't know how many of you guys get into hyperspace or multiple dimensional thinking, but we generally perceive 3 dimensions in our world, and we're aware of multiple dimensions, right? You're aware of the time dimension, if you're Star Trek fans, you see that sometimes they get into these time-space, the warp in the time-space continuum, and that's when you get to see these other dimensions. And so they're mathematically postulated, likely to exist, but we can't see them. So in some ways, a hypertext is like that. It's got this dimensional. You know it's out there, but you can't really see it until you get there. So you don't really have to spend too much time thinking about it, but it's interesting to know that that's really what he's after, the notion that text is constructed and experienced in more than the usual number of dimensions. So it's not just like a super text, it's not like bigger text. It's this multi-dimensional. And I often talk about it in terms of multi-sequential. One of the things that I'll do is I'll pull some slides from previous presentations that I made, and like today I was just dragging them in, and I said, I don't like the way this looks. So I don't like the way this looks. I'll just put that out there. So it's kind of an older structure that I built. You can also pull apart the code and see how this thing works, because you can make slides or stories that look like this as well. So I want to talk about the word wiki. So what's a wiki? You hear wiki, what do you think? I've given you my answers already, but what do you think?
User-made repository of information.
User-made. User-made. So, okay, as opposed to producer-made.
Yeah, something as opposed to, say, a wiki about, like a wiki chronicling the Star Wars movies as opposed to Wikipedia.
Okay, wait. So is Wikipedia a wiki? It's user-made, right? There's no compare Wikipedia to Encyclopedia Britannica. The users, the people write the Wikipedia. Is that what you were getting at?
And that was I realized that the Wikipedia was a bad example. I more meant Wikipedia has oversight, whereas a lot of others don't.
Okay. So Michael is suggesting that to him, when he hears wiki, he thinks, and I'm going to put some words in his description, he thinks collaborative, user-contributed, community-built, okay? And so that's the common definition of a wiki, and that's the first point that I've got there. It's a web page that anybody can write, which gets a little bit to how it's managed, not necessarily how it's constructed. But you're absolutely right that that's the common and usual understanding of wiki, primarily driven by Wikipedia, the world's most famous wiki. And so Wikipedia, of course, was, and what we mean by the notion of a web page that anyone can write. So what's a web page? So we're going to drill down a little bit. A web page is anything that responds to a request via computer network to the HTTP protocol. Okay, so what else is there besides HTTP?
HTTPS.
Yeah, okay, that's the same. That's just secure. For our purposes, we'll treat it the same. But you're right. What else is there?
Yeah, so if you're on the internet,
What do you got?
how do you type in the HTTP?
Yeah. Yeah. So for example, my URL there is 127.0.0. It's actually the protocol there is file : //. If I open up file directly from my, I think I want to do this in a new tab. Open my COM216. It's file : wow, that's really slow. There it is, file : //. Right, it's not HTTP because it's not going over the hypertext transport protocol. It's actually using the file protocol. The one other that you might see is FTP. So if I go FTP : // the server is called ftp.sunyit.edu. Can't be reached, blah, blah. Okay, but I can exchange files. Okay. So the notion of a web page that anyone can write is really saying anything that responds to an HTTP protocol. Okay. What does it mean that anyone can write? Yeah.
It's simplified.
Yeah, but you can, yeah, it's simplified compared to what? Like, what do you guys write web pages in? You don't, right? Does anybody make web pages ever? James does. You write in HTML. Is that simple? So the notion of a wiki, a web page that anyone can write, is supposed to simplify from HTML. So it's supposed to make it a little bit more simpler. It did not necessarily imply a web page that anyone could edit. Michael was suggesting that a wiki is collaborative in the sense anyone can edit it or add to the site, but the initial idea of a web page that anyone can write is not really intended to be collaborative. So that's a little bit of a contested idea. It doesn't, Wikipedia is an agreement that's collaboratively written, but all wikis, Tiddly Wiki specifically, is not, right? I can't write on your page. I can't edit your pages. The second concept that I want to get across that I think matters or is associated with the idea of wiki is that it embeds the grammar of hypertext in the punctuation of writing. So the grammar of hypertext is things like links and tags. The easiest example is those double brackets around a word that makes it into a link. How do you make a link in Word? Anybody ever built a hyperlink in Microsoft Word? How do you do it?
You've got it started manually.
You highlight the word, you go insert hyperlink, and you paste in the link. So that is not embedding the grammar of hypertext in the punctuation of writing. In Tiddly Wiki, in the wikis, not just Tiddly Wiki, in all wikis, Wikipedia, Wikipedia is written in MediaWiki is the software. And there's a bunch of wiki softwares out there. In wiki software, you create a link usually by enclosing things in double brackets. So it's like, just like at the end of a sentence, you type a period. When you want to sort of pause your thought, you put a comma. If you want to do something slightly different, you might put a colon or parentheses. Those are punctuation marks. Okay, so we embed the grammar of thinking in punctuation. We're so used to it, we don't even notice that we do it. But when we conclude a thought, we put a period. When we want to start an entirely new collection of thoughts, we might hit return and tab to indent, or just return and creates a new paragraph. That's punctuation. And what we want to do is introduce the punctuation of hypertext into the grammar of hypertext into the punctuation of writing. So it becomes, my goal is that it becomes as natural for you to make a link as it does to end a sentence. And natural is not quite the right word, but it's as easy or straightforward to make something into a link as it is to make something into a sentence. So that's pretty different. That's different than any writing that you've ever done or learned. And you've learned about writing since you were in, I don't know, ever? Like preschool, you started to learn letters, and you probably learned periods around first grade. People started introducing the concepts of punctuation, and maybe commas showed up in like third grade. Well, maybe in sixth grade, somebody said, hey, there's these things called parentheses. So if you think about when did you learn the punctuation marks, but you've never learned punctuation marks for linking. And we're going to extend that, not just linking, but we'll include transcluding and filtering and other things. Yeah, and you've already learned double square brackets. That's why I start there. The idea of the origins of the word wiki actually come from a person. Like most things in the internet, they were actually invented at one point, and this is like a really sucky slide because you can't really see it. So I'm going to let you figure that on your own and not read it to you. But this guy Ward Cunningham, who literally invented the first wiki, was called Wiki Web. And you might say, where'd that word wiki comes from? Well, it's a Hawaiian word that means quick. So he got to the airport, as he tells the story here, and he was told to take the wiki bus, the quick bus. And he thought that was kind of cool. And his stuff is still online. These are still live links that he wrote. And you can see sort of his discussions about the origins of the wiki. And it's interesting from a historical perspective, but the notion of wiki was really meant to be quick. So at the time, HTML editing was slow, and this was meant to be quick, fast, from an editing perspective. Later, Ward added in the whole collaboration part, and then that eventually ends up being Wikipedia. So now many people agree with Michael that wiki to them means collaborative. Tiddly Wiki, on the other hand, the wiki part of the Tiddly Wiki really meant quick and not collaborative. That kind of gives you a sense of where the word wiki comes from. Again, that the most important thing to me is that middle point. You embed the punctuation, the grammar of hypertext, and the punctuation of writing. So linking becomes as easy and natural and part of your flow as periods and commas. And so that leads us to this word Tiddly. This guy who invented and wrote Tiddly Wiki, developed it, still very active. And I've known him now for a long time. I actually saw him last summer, and he come to the States once. He's British, lives in Oxford. He named his program in 2005 Tiddly Wiki, and I think he's regretted it ever since, because it's a really sucky name. It's like and it's hard to take it seriously in most people's minds, Americans especially, but also I think the Brits, less so non-native English speakers. They immediately go to Tiddlywinks. Tiddly implies this like toy. It's just got no positive connotations. A tiddler is a small, in the UK at least, is thought of as a small fish. So he was after it to be small. But once you name something, it's really hard to change it, so he just lives with it. I know Jeremy pretty well at this point. Last year when I taught this class, he and I did a whole series of podcasts, interviews, and I'll make those available to you, and you can listen to them. Some of the discussions are better than others, but and he's kind of helped me understand a little bit about what's unique and distinctive about Tiddly. And at least in my mind, I think that Jeremy is sort of close to Ted Nelson in some respects. He's not a scholar. He's a developer. He's a programmer. I think he's one of those guys who found that college was too restrictive, so he never did any university education. Whereas Ted Nelson, on the other hand, is more of a traditional scholar. He went through university, and I think he eventually earned a PhD. So, but I think Tiddly Wiki is sort of like what Ted Nelson envisioned for hypertext, which is why we play with it. But from Jeremy wanted to build a platform, and I've interpreted Tiddly Wiki, I guess I should say. Come on, show the text part there. As a, I like to think of it as a platform for writing, reading, thinking, teaching, and learning. So Blackboard, you've all touched Blackboard. Blackboard is not a platform for writing. You can write in it, but it sucks. It's got like, it's just not good. It's basically a platform for organizing materials that you might want your students to see. I don't think of it as a platform for teaching, but I do see Tiddly Wiki as a platform for teaching. So right now, so far, I've been mostly teaching codey things, not thinking things, but you need a little bit of basics before you can start thinking hypertextually. And you're going to get there this afternoon, or this at 11. You're going to start thinking hypertextually. We're going to start doing more reading in Tiddly Wiki because it's a way of reading. I mean, you're used to reading books, but that's not the fire alarm. That's the backup thing, right? So you're used to reading books, and you're used to reading web pages, but Tiddly Wiki is going to be a slightly different approach to reading. Clearly, and especially with today's exercise, it becomes a platform for writing. I think it's a platform for thinking. My goal, and I'm curious to see if this works over the course of the semester, is if you begin to think hypertextually. If you've ever taken a foreign language, you know that especially if you're fluent in a second language, you know that you've reached fluency when your brain starts thinking in that other language. Like that you're not constantly translating. If you're just but if you translate, if every single thought comes back to English, translate, turn it back to German if you're doing German, you're not thinking in German. I want you to begin to think hypertextually. I want you to think in terms of links and transclusions. And so that we'll see if it's a platform that allows you and encourages you to think. Some of you who write games in different platforms, you might begin to think in that platform. You begin to see things that work in that platform. You don't have a thought and have to translate it into code. You can just do it. Depending on how skilled you are at keyboarding and typing, this thing and this thing, right? So most of you are way faster at using the phone than I am at typing out characters and stuff on the phone. And I think you think with your thumbs. The words come from your brain and they come out of your thumbs. You're not translating, say, where's that letter? When you first touched a keyboard, you were saying, where's the A? Where's the B? Right? At this point, I'm very fluent on a keyboard, having done it for thousands of years, it seems to me, but not 50 years, not quite. I can think faster than the thoughts come through my fingers really fast. If you ever want to test to see if that's happening, start paying attention to the words in your brain before you type them out. And then you'll say, oh my God, and it slows you way down. So I'm not looking for letters. I don't even know how it works, but I'm thinking through my fingers. I can't do it on the phone. I have to find the letter somehow. I want you to get thinking hypertextually so that you're thinking, you're writing the code almost as you're thinking it. As you imagine a link, the link is there. As opposed to, open bracket, A space, href equals, quote, go find the link, paste, quote, close it, type in the link, close /a, which is what you do in HTML. So we'll see if you can get there. So that's my goal with the Tiddly part. You've experienced tiddlers. Tiddlers are everything in Tiddly Wiki. Everything's a tiddler. We use it to manage the display. We use it to manage the content. All of the code gets written in Tiddler. Everything is in a Tiddler. There's nothing in a Tiddly Wiki that's not in a Tiddler, including all of the source code for the program you're using, which my guess is you've never used another program that does that. And as you get deeper into it, you'll say, wow, that's actually really cool. Like my source code is right there with my it's a little mind-boggling. If you use programs, you use programs all the time, like Microsoft Word or whatever you write games in, Unity Game Engine or something like that, but you can't see the source code when you're working. It's like they're separate, but TiddlyWiki kind of combines them in tiddlers. Everything shows up in a tiddler, so the display and the data is really tightly integrated. Full cascading style sheets, CSS is embedded in every tiddler. You can change everything because it's completely configurable. That's because it's a single page application. You sort of are right in the code. You by downloading your wikis, opening a wiki, you get all the code that you need, so you can disconnect from the internet. There's no back-end application there. Everything's in there. All your resources get dynamically loaded. None of this is critical to understand. But if you, over time, as you get deeper into it, if you want to go further, it becomes really important. It's also open source. So you can, it's all, and I would encourage you to open source the things that you build as well. And the community is there, so it's really easy to find other people's code and use it. And almost everything that I've seen in TiddlyWiki, at least the code, if not the content, is open source, so you can take other people's stuff and play with it. When I think about the TiddlyWiki and the Tiddly part, what does it replace? Word, maybe, interesting. Text editors, maybe. PowerPoint, you're looking at a set of slides. I don't know, maybe I don't need PowerPoint anymore. It enhances Excel sheets, Excel and Sheets, Google Sheets. It kind of runs a database. I mean, it is a database. There's not an SQL engine under there, but it's got its own data searching. So, I'm not sure how it scales, but it does run on Amazon Web Services, and I've seen it scale to thousands, not millions yet, of tiddlers. So, or tens of thousands even, I think we're running. Maybe it replaces Dreamweaver, which is a program that people use for building HTML sites. I don't know. We'll see. It's small base, not commercially released, so there's not a lot of it doesn't have the scale of Unity or Word or something like that, but it's an interesting community. And we emulate that open source aspect of it in this class by sharing work with each other, by sharing code with each other, by me writing code, you dragging and dropping it. We talk about it in the Design Right Google group. And then when you find the Design Right Google group is not sufficient for your needs, you can graduate and move your questions to the TiddlyWiki Google group and talk to the rest of the world out there. So, so that was what I just kind of wanted to do, that little quick 20 minutes. I'd encourage you to go back and read some of that content. If not now, later when you say, I don't really know what Tiddly is anymore. Like, I don't remember what a wiki is. You can go back, catch this video, or look at those slides. And to emphasize how this is a platform for teaching, learning, thinking, reading, writing, as you're seeing, everything in the class is in my wiki and available to put in your wiki, or you can take mine and mess with it. And we can, if those of you who want to start taking notes on these concepts in your own copy of Design Right, I can talk to you about how to maintain that and how that might work. So